Alrighty, everybody. So what we're going to do is, once we get this camera set up here, the phone, we're going to dive into the last section here, as far as I can tell, of our exploration of the argument for Catholicism from reality. We've gone through many elements of this kind of chart that we've been relating to this analogy to a book, which is what we've been arguing from, to kind of explain the nature of reality from a Catholic perspective. We've been doing this essentially establishing at each step of the way that Catholicism has this kind of Goldilocks effect and shows itself to be the best description of reality. Ultimately, what we've established is the nature of an authentic Catholic synthesis that takes into account the best aspects of tradition, preservation of visible union with the hierarchy, and the ability to go to the margins, so that everything that's authentically human can be brought into the church, to the visible church, and then reformed in accordance with tradition. And this has shown us this deep pattern of how Christianity is truly to be understood as this authentic Catholicism. And it also shows how this type of Catholicism is capable of looking at all the insights and strengths of all the different things we explored in other areas of this talk. So these different branches of Protestantism, these different elements of other religions that are outside the purview of Christianity. And it looks at how Christianity is really the means of integrating all that is authentically human and uniting it to Christ so that it can be sanctified. And this is the pattern of the Incarnation. This is the way the Incarnation works. This is what authentic Catholicism is. This is what it's all about. We see this in, for example, the apparitions of Mary, such as the Our Lady of Guadalupe, where she takes on and clothes herself in the iconography of the Aztec culture, so as to redeem it and elevate it and bring it into union with Christ and make it communicate Him. And so this is the true path of the Incarnation. And we can see now clearly that Catholicism is the true religion, and how to think about it as the true religion, and see that there's nothing good in any of the other systems that cannot be integrated and elevated and transformed and baptized and brought into that Catholic synthesis with that coherent understanding of how tradition, coherence with the modern hierarchy, and going to the margins works together. So we have this real way of understanding Catholicism as this thing. But not only do we come to see, maybe we used metaphors of a tree or a ship, we also understand how to now live and have a blueprint for life. We understand how to use every authentically human principle, practice, and engage with all different human groups without falsely flinching in fear, because we understand how everything works and the way that it does. And this vision doesn't just affirm that Catholicism is true. It affirms that Catholicism is like the chemical reaction of the Incarnation across all human thought, practice, and communities, reconciling all things in Christ and His Catholic Church. And it's tempting to stop right there, kind of put a bow on it, but there's still like one box left on the chart. And this last box, the nature of matter itself, and that kind of that, I mean, actually we're really with two boxes, the words, the sentences in the page, or objects, their relationships, and consciousness, and then the nature of matter itself. These things kind of become this final confirmation that confirms this vision of reality as the true vision of reality itself. So here's what we're going to do. Because at the very beginning, this whole argument was based on the book analogy, where we opened the book and we said, hey, there are words in the book, there are sentences in the book, and there are pages in the book. And we said that you can't explain reality from the book itself. You can't explain reality using objects. You can't explain reality using the relationships between objects. You can't explain reality as just a product of consciousness. You can't do that, because that leads us down to the paths of Buddhism, of Judaism and Islam, and Hinduism. And so we really saw that you can't do that. These things leave incomplete pictures of reality. And so how are we going to really make sense of these things? Ultimately what we've done is from that problem, we had to kind of reach outside of reality. We had to find the author of reality and had to look at the nature of the human character in order to determine, okay, yes, it's the Trinitarian God and the incarnational God. And we kind of got this whole huge framework that now is going to make us look past so that we're going to see objects. We're going to see that there are relationships between objects. And we're going to see that there is consciousness. But we're going to see now the things that make sense of all of those things. Because now that we have this whole coherent worldview that we've made through having this whole understanding of this book analogy come into focus, we see this whole big picture of reality. We now have the explanatory tools to make sense of the things that seemed like insoluble paradoxes when we saw those conflicts between Buddhism and Judaism and Islam and Hinduism and so on and so forth. So now we're in a completely different position. We have a full theistic worldview with explanatory abilities, and we're going to be able to come up with some answers. So, let's think about this. Let's look at objects. So you look at an object, and let's look at my hand. If you say, okay, well, where's the hand in the hand? Is the hand of the nails? Is the hand of the fingers? Okay, it falls apart. You can't find the hand of the hand. This is what the Buddhists were talking about. But maybe there's some other deeper truth that's similar to that, but doesn't kind of get us off the rails. And that truth is called contingency. So my hand is not able to hold itself in reality. It doesn't necessarily exist. My fingernails don't have to exist for there to be a universe. My hand doesn't create itself. All these things are contingent, meaning they are not necessary. They are not necessary being, they are contingent being. And there's also such a thing as non-contingent being. That's God. But we're going to get there in a second. So the objects in the universe are contingent. They don't generate themselves, sustain themselves, so on and so forth. They don't ground their own existence. And that's kind of the truth that we're pointing at when we're saying the object is empty of self-existence, or it has no self. But the real thing is to say it's contingent. And that helps us explain objects, or that aspect the Buddhists were getting at. But now we really can't deny the fact that this is my hand. It's still here, even though it's contingent. And it's really this hand. It's not the other hand. It's not my other hand. And it's not Joe's hand or Jane's hand. It's my hand. Even though it's contingent and it's hard to figure out what makes it my hand. So it has what's called a thisness to it, a haseity. It's kind of a concept from the Scotist school. So we have this idea from kind of the Thomist school, which is contingency, and an idea from the Scotist school, which is haseity, meaning the thisness, it's this hand. It's itself. It has a kind of quality of being itself. But now we have a problem again. On one hand, that the chair it's not necessary being, it's contingent. And on the other hand, it is my hand. It's this hand. So that's kind of contradictory. It's kind of like, where does it come from? What makes it itself? But it's really itself. So in the earlier phases of the argument, these things kind of were in insoluble contradiction. They kept colliding. They felt contradictory. The story of it's being my hand and it's over here and this is this person's hand and that's that person's hand. That's kind of a contradiction with what's the hand? It's kind of not really holding itself in being. But now we see the thing that holds it together, which is participation. And the hand exists because God lets the hand exist. God holds it in being. The chair participates in the action of God, not because God is hiding inside my hand, holding it together like some type of glue, but because God sustains it through his action, through his energies, so to speak. So this hand can be fully itself. This chair can be fully itself. The hand can be contingent and not be, it's not like it doesn't have necessary being. The chair is not necessary. And everything that exists, all the things you see, are all being sustained by the action of God. So that's how you reconcile contingency, haseity, participation. And it's interesting because contingency is like a basically Thomistic kind of Western scholastic idea. Haseity is a Scotist kind of idea, and participation is a Palamite kind of idea. And so we see that these things are, again, you only really get this account when you are in the tradition that allows you to think in terms of Thomism, Scotism, and Palamism altogether. And that's only Catholicism, because we've already seen that only Catholicism allows you to have all three of those schools held in a way that is not making them contradict each other, that's letting them kind of fight off different adversaries, kind of deal with different problems, and not contradict each other. So Catholicism gives you this thing that's actually very strong. It gives you the most precise description of what an object actually is. It resolves the contradictions we ran into earlier. It can explain matter itself without collapsing into emptiness, into just stories that are kind of coming out of nowhere, or just saying that everything is a mysticism of consciousness. It solves the problems that were proposed in the earliest beginnings of this argument from reality that made us begin this journey. And so, since Catholicism is the worldview that explains reality and resolves the contradictions that made us say to begin the search of looking for an author rather than just staying within the pages of the book, we realize that not just spiritually, not just morally, but metaphysically, Catholicism is the true religion. And that's the cherry on top, is that reality itself testifies to Catholicism from the top to the bottom, that the structure of the reality is all like this. And now we can look back over the whole book analogy and see it as a whole. We can see the Father as the author, the Son as the editor, the Holy Spirit as the agent, the philosophical schools of Thomism as the publishing company, Scotism as the printing company, and Palimism as the delivery company. We could see the Incarnation as the bookseller, the Bible as the clerk, the sacraments as the cashier, Christ as the one divine person, the buyer, his two natures, the owner, his two wills in harmony, the reader. We could see the objects in the universe as words, the relations and stories about them as sentences, the consciousness in which we perceive them as the page. When we could see that this is all grounded in the fact that, it's kind of grounded in the, the contingency is like the spine. The contingency is like the cover. I'm sorry. The Hesiody is like the spine, and maybe participation is like the title or the dust jacket or the illustration on the cover. And so we see that the book analogy is fully fleshed out. We see that all these levels of reality are explained. We see this comprehensive model that has come into being and help us explain reality on every level and reveals at every step that Catholicism follows this Goldilocks principle of being the best way of explaining reality in this book analogy. And so we've gone to this place now where all of this fits, where we realize, and we have to realize that this is just one column on a chart that I'm calling the cruciform synthesis or the cross chart. And this is only one of these columns. That is this is a reasoning developed out of one column of this chart, which has four columns. That it was four rows, so to speak. And this is all developed out of this one row, which is about things and describes everything from the nature of God to the nature of matter, and places the incarnation of Christ in the center. And understands that everything in this chart is placing Christ, his life, his death, his resurrection, at the center of everything. And that's the key to understanding this whole approach, is that this is not just an approach where we are thinking about Catholicism as separate or an arbitrary religion. We are dealing with, this is a comprehensive attempt, especially we've seen here this kind of way of reasoning deeply about what religion is true. This is a comprehensive attempt to deal with reality, a comprehensive attempt to deal with what's the nature of things, what's the nature of persons, what's the nature of place, what's the nature of the world and the phases of the world. This is a deep way of understanding that time, space, and everything is all centered around Christ. And ultimately, the conclusion becomes overwhelming as we see from this whole synthesis. We've seen today that Catholicism is the true religion. We've seen all those things, but we ultimately can see more. We can ultimately come to see Christ as the center of all reality, his crucifixion as the true center of time and space. We can see so many things that are deeply amazing and profound if we can place Christ where he belongs, as the true center of all things. And it shows us that Catholicism is not just one religion among many others. It is the most comprehensive way of understanding and organizing and seeing all reality. And this this is not merely a way of arguing. This is a way of seeing. And that's why it's so profound, because it's a way of having accurate sight, having accurate knowledge, having an accurate perception, and seeing the patterns everywhere. Once we begin to see the patterns, We cease to need to reassure ourselves of arguments. And once we have sight, there's this sense in which, they say we walk by faith and not by sight. But sometimes it's helpful to see. Sometimes it's good. We need some light to be shown in our path, especially in this modern time, with all of its complexity, with all of its suffering, with all of its confusions. Because if we don't have sight, they say there's a thing in the scripture that say, without vision, the people perish. And truly we shall perish and not be in the true church if we have not the right vision. Because if we can't see what's going on, we will suffer and we will hold back and we won't live out the true way of being Catholic. We'll hold back from a life of emotional liberation. We'll hold back from true doctrinal understanding. We'll abandon Catholicism for orthodoxy, or we'll go into traditionalist things, or we'll do this and that, because we don't understand how it all fits together. We won't live what I think is the life that we are called to live if we don't understand these things. And this is, again, this is resolving personal problems. This is giving personal direction. This is creating emotional freedom. This is not just an argument. This is not just a reasoning. This is not just those things. This resolves fear. This resolves hesitation. This resolves the inability to trust Christ, the ability to trust his church. This gives you permission to be fully Catholic, fully alive as a Catholic. It allows you to have a philosophical foundation for the integration of all that is authentically human in every beneficial ideology on the face of the earth. It has a foundation for integrating all the therapies, all the different philosophies, all the different practices, all the different ideas from the different Protestant denominations, with a real intellectual rigor that's not chaotic, but coherent. It lets you breathe. It lets you live without fear of delusion. It lets you understand how you can really integrate these practices in yourself without going, ooh, is that really Catholic? Is that this? Is that that? You understand how the human mind works, so you understand how to take things in and reform them and integrate them in light of tradition. It's because you understand how reality works on a grand scheme. So this is not just a theory. This is a gateway to a way of life, to a pathway of freedom. It's a pathway that enables you to really come to a coherent understanding that lets you settle into something that's, there's a hymn that says, "This is my Father's world." And it lets you settle into that. It lets you realize that this is a Catholic world that you live in. And so you're not only a Catholic, there's this term, Catholic, where it refers to the universal church, the whole church. And we really see this other deeper element of Catholicism here, this understanding that it is the religion of the universe. That's why it is the universal church, so to speak. It gives us that other layer, that term, universal. And it gives us this deep way of life. It gives us this true freedom to live out the fullness of the incarnation. That's what this is all meant to do. So it shows us how Christ reconciles all things. It shows us how the Catholic Church is the continuation of the incarnation in history. It shows us why the fullness of the truth of Christianity is found in the Catholic Church. And it leads us to live that out in fullness and in freedom. So I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this series. This series has been quite a tour, going through this book analogy, fleshing out how reality can be described like a book, talking about the Trinity, how we can describe the Trinity, the incarnation, in the Bible and the sacraments, how we can describe that, how we can look at, the things in a book, objects, stories, consciousness, and the nature of reality, and seeing how this multi-level model fits together and describes real territory, sinks our teeth into the real territory of reality. And I hope that this is helpful to you, and I hope that this is beneficial on many levels to you, because this is, again, a pathway of accurate knowledge that is meant to liberate us for wholehearted practice. So we will close in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, whom we now see, the blueprint of all reality, is a reflection of the fingerprints of the Most Holy Trinity and Christ's glorious incarnation. And I hope that these things will reassure you that this sight will strengthen your faith so that you can move forward without fear.